Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox, or in this case, the Failbox, for the 22nd of August, 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, I'm still sick, and I'm about to go to MLG, so the plan was to get a bunch of content ready for you while I was away. Didn't happen, because I was struck down with what appears to be man flu, which, as you're aware, is a virulent and deadly disease contracted only by men. One way or the other, I'm going to try and get this done for you regardless, so many apologies for the lack of content in the coming days. I am very sorry. I do hope the PAX coverage will make up for that. The game in the background is Counter-Strike Go. This is Arms Race, which is essentially gun game, and, well, if you've played many a modern first-person shooter, the chances are you know what gun game's all about. First email comes in from Bearded Bruce that says this: what are your opinions on Steam Greenlight, their new indie selection system? On paper it seems like a great way and easier for Steam staff to get games on Steam, but there are a few issues I can think of that would affect it, like only well-known developers having their games featured and people may only vote for the games they'd like. Not to discourage the already successful developers, but they could put in a below-par game and will automatically receive votes often without the customer actually looking at the game's specifications. Then a new developer uploads a new interesting idea that genuinely deserves votes, but does not actually receive them. This issue could be exasperated if an internet celebrity such as a famous YouTube group were to make a game and immediately receive a ridiculous number of votes. Any games which could be considered remotely similar to each other may be prone to a massive amount of negative feedback. Take Terraria and Minecraft. A lot of people plainly thought Terraria was just a plain rip-off of Minecraft, although actually playing it would reveal otherwise. So if Terraria wasn't Steam Greenlight, chances are many people would have done just that and written it off as a Minecraft clone. I think this won't entirely stop the advance of indie games, but there's a chance that it could very well hinder the progress, albeit it could go any way at the moment. Well, I actually think quite the opposite could be the problem there. The point that you made there is that Terraria, if put on Steam Greenlight, may have failed because people would have seen it as a Minecraft clone and as a result would have not voted for it or whatever. I think quite frankly you grossly underestimate the popularity of this emerging genre here that I would call the block builder. This is the next big new genre. It's creative sandbox gaming based around a simplistic construction system that is also core to the game mechanics. This is a fairly new idea. This hasn't actually been done before. There have been plenty of games which allowed you to make your own levels, but none that actually required you to gather the materials to build your own levels. There is, in my opinion, no question that we're going to be seeing a hell of a lot more of this, and in different genres as well. Elements of Minecraft and Terraria will be taken by other games and integrated into it. This is an emerging genre that we're seeing here. So what I would argue is actually quite the opposite. You are not going to have a lack of votes for games like this. You're going to have perhaps too many votes, because people want games that are like games they've already played. For all the crying and screaming about innovation, actually people just want similar experiences a lot of the time because it makes them feel more comfortable. They know they like it. It's why people tend to stick to listening to specific genres of music. I know I like metal music, for instance, so I tend to just listen to metal music because I already know the fundamentals of the genre are things that I like, so it's more likely that those properties will be carried over to other bands that I will then listen to and enjoy, as opposed to listening to hard house, for instance, that I know I don't necessarily like and would have to try somewhat harder to discover something I enjoyed within that genre. I do, however, agree with the other point that something true and innovative could very easily be left by the wayside. Admittedly, that could happen anyway. There are innovative or otherwise very cool games that get passed over by the Steam selection team all the damn time. I think the risk of turning this kind of power over to the community is that it benefits certain genres, bandwagons, and things like that, as opposed to others. I think that, yes, there is a genuine risk of, say, Yog Ventures coming along and saying, hey, everyone, go and vote for our Steam Greenlight, and suddenly it shoots to the top of the rankings because essentially Yog's cast are an interest group now. I mean, they're large enough to be able to push traffic to pretty much anything they want, and that's the case with any large YouTube channel, this one included. There's a risk as well that not enough people will actually use the system for it to be truly democratic. It's very easy to influence a system when no one else is involved. Take King of the Web. This is a great example of a system which appears to be democratic, but in reality actually isn't. The reason is that King of the Web doesn't have its own installed user base. Its user base comes from the people that actually campaign on the site. And then what often happens is the users that came along to vote for that guy will leave once his contest is over. Now, in theory, that site is supposed to reward internet awesome, and hopefully what you would expect to see from that site is the promotion of genuine new talent. The problem is that the system is set up in such a way that it is just a popularity contest, and it's very easy to completely overwhelm whatever installed user base is on that site with the user base of a much more colossal entity, such as one of the really big YouTube channels. It seems to me that Steam Greenlight will be very much opt-in, and I think that actually carries with it an inherent risk. Because not everyone on Steam is involved in Greenlight, then what you can get is an insular community that has shared interests and only votes for certain things, or indeed a community that is vulnerable to this kind of vote bombing, I suppose you could call it, where a large entity backs a game and then sends all of their minions in that direction, and it completely overwhelms everybody else. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think you can definitely use your powers for good in that regard. How many Kickstarter campaigns have got funded just because a large YouTube channel or a large gaming personality or whatever on Twitter or Facebook got behind it and said, hey guys, you really need to go and make sure this thing actually happens? How much good has been done for the industry as a result of that? An awful lot. But on the flip side, the opposite can end up happening. Interest groups can very much push their own agenda, push their own games, the games of their friends, and dominate this list. I think another problem just has to come down to the fact that I don't really think gamers are honestly looking for all these truly innovative titles on a wide scale. I think for the most part, Kickstarter actually demonstrates this pretty well. What are some of the really successful Kickstarters? Well, the answer to that is rebirths of old games. Really successful Kickstarters. An old school point and click by Double Fine, that was really successful. Wasteland 2, also really successful. Shadowrun Returns, also very successful. These, if I recall correctly, are some of the most monetarily successful campaigns, and they are about bringing back older games. They're not actually about innovating. They're not about creating new mechanics, new genres. They're about bringing back old ones. I think for indie devs, Greenlight becomes less of an exercise in, hey, look at our great game, and more of an exercise in marketing. They need to make people interested, and usually that will involve some kind of gimmick. It might involve a really nice graphic style, it might involve a really awesome gimmick like, I don't know, gravity reversal, or portal guns, or, of course, back to the old point, it might involve some mechanic that is currently a bit of a hot button. You make a game that's similar to Happy Wheels, for instance. You exploit the current bandwagon, and up to the top it goes. And at that point, I really don't think the Greenlight actually serves its purpose. I think you would need a sufficiently large user base on Greenlight, actively using Greenlight and understanding what it is for in order for it to be successful. Hopefully, that is what will happen. If it doesn't, then I expect quite a few pretty samey games to make it to the top on a fairly regular basis. I just don't have faith in gamers in general to look for and genuinely promote and get behind truly innovative and new products. I don't blame them for it. You play the games you want to play, right? You play the games that you enjoy. Taking a risk is not necessarily something that pays off, and gamers have been burnt so many times by crazy promises. I mean, hell, Spore was one of the most disappointing games of all time for me as a result of nothing but promises, and so many people bought into that idea only to be disappointed when they actually played the game. I just think it's a sad industry reality, and if Valve can overcome it, then Valve are fantastic in that regard, but I'm not holding out any hope for it. Just a PSA before we go on, we've been getting a lot of really long emails again. I had to talk about this probably about a month or so ago, saying, if the email is too long, I just won't read it. If I can't fit it on the screen, if it takes too much time within the actual show, that causes problems. I mean, that's part of the reason why for so long we just did 2 questions. I think that here we'll be on 2 questions again, because these emails are just lengthy. So I just asked people to email into mailbox@cynicalbrit.com to try and keep things just a little bit concise. Try not to load your questions either. I think there's a lot of people that email in with an agenda, and they're looking for confirmation of that agenda, and I don't necessarily want to provide that. So thank you very much for the emails you send, and sorry that we can't feature a lot of them on the show. We do get about 600 to 1,000 every day, so it's quite a few. Alright, this one comes in from Eugene that says, my topic for Mailbox is about the company under the name of Hammerpoint Interactive. As I was searching the web, I stumbled upon their new game named The War Z. I looked up info on it and found out that they are trying to release the game within a year. The game also closely resembles the very popular mod for Arma 2 DayZ. This seems to me like this company, seeing the high success of DayZ, tried to rush a game with the same idea. Even some of the character models look the same as DayZ. DayZ was made by Dean Rocket Hall, but in War Z there's nothing mentioned about his idea on the War Z official website. Is it legal to take an idea like that from its original creator without even mentioning his name? And do you think that they are just trying to rush this game before Rocket makes his own standalone game, so they have the official rights to the idea? Alright, let's get something out in the open here. There's no such thing as rights to the idea. You can't copyright game mechanics. It cannot be done. And quite frankly, the idea of a zombie apocalypse is so incredibly generic that you couldn't argue for intellectual property there either. If you could, then God knows what would end up happening. Alright, DayZ, great. Let's wipe that off the face of the planet because, hey, we have World War Z and oral history of the zombie war. It is blindingly obvious that zombie games that came out since the World War Z book was published in 2006 have been influenced by this book. Not only that, but of course the Zombie Survival Guide by the same author released in 2003. You can't sue somebody for making a similar game to yours. You can sue them for stealing your art assets, but game mechanics, no. You cannot copyright a game mechanic. Game mechanics do not exist in terms of intellectual property protection, and quite frankly, thank God for that. Because if they did, we would be in a really bad place. It's really easy to look at recent events from, say, the iOS store and come down on the side of, we need protection for intellectual property when it comes to game mechanics. We need to be able to protect our mechanics and our ideas from being stolen by other people. And it's understandable why initially people might think that when they see things like Muffin Night, which is a blatant rip-off of Super Crate Box, or when they see Dream Heights, which is a blatant rip-off of Tiny Tower. You can even look at companies like Gameloft that put out games like Shadowgun, which is incredibly similar to Gears of War, for instance. But then, how far do you go? Do you look at Inversion and say, this is a Gears of War ripoff? In fact, do you look at any third-person based cover shooter and say, right, this is a Gears of War ripoff? Because if you do, then you start running into issues. What parts of Gears of War would be protected by intellectual property? The cover system? The way that running works, for instance? The camera movement and the sway, the so-called roadie run? Because if you start doing things like that, then you start losing titles like Mass Effect, which very obviously uses the cover-based system from games like Gears of War. But then you've got to go back and say, hang on a second, where did the cover system come from? It didn't come from Gears of War, it came from Kill Switch, or arguably earlier Metal Gear Solid 2, or even earlier than that, Winback. Operation Bloody Winback had a cover system in 1999. Hell, if you want to go crazy, you could go even further back to Devastators. That game was released in 1988. Where does it end? At what point do you draw the arbitrary line between this is copied and protected by this imaginary intellectual property law and this isn't copied? The answer right now is there is no line. And quite frankly, that's a good thing, because that lack of a line has resulted in the evolution of video games that we know today. Let's just say, for instance, that this IP law existed in 1999, along comes Tecmo Koei, and they say, hey, we have Operation Winback. This has got a cover system, this is our mechanic, no one else gets to use it. Alright, so as a result, we do not get Metal Gear Solid 2, we don't get Gears of War, we don't get Army of Two, we don't get Mass Effect, we don't get pretty much anything else that uses that kind of mechanic. And other games have to come up with something different, which very well might be completely inferior to the system that Winback actually implemented in 1999. So, it's a case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What about if this was applied to movies? What about the idea of bullet time, for instance? What if we weren't allowed to film in 1,000 frames per second using that technique because someone else did it first? It stifles creativity. You might think that it protects it, but it actually does quite the opposite. Game mechanics are so vital to video games. It seems really obvious when you think about it, but you've got to understand that without a solid set of game mechanics under the hood, it doesn't matter how beautiful your game is, how well realized your characters are, how fantastic and in-depth and engrossing your story is, because your game doesn't work properly. If it had not shown us the way when it comes to first-person shooters with Doom, and of course before that Wolfenstein 3D, and later on we had games like Duke Nukem, like Quake, if we hadn't had those games, then what would we have now? And the answer is really not an awful lot. Games get better over time. Sometimes they slip up on the way. I don't think there's any real question about that, but so many classics have come about as a result of games before it coming up with a framework for the game mechanics that later become relied upon in an entire genre. That's how genres actually get built. Think about Minecraft, for instance. Minecraft came from Infiniminer. With this proposed kind of intellectual property law, what would happen is Minecraft would not have been able to be created, which would kind of suck considering Infiniminer barely was a game to begin with. And as a result, we would then probably not have had Terraria, we would have not had the other games that are coming along after that, which involve block-based building, such as Brick Force, and then we might not even have got games that are based on the ideas of Minecraft, but are different games entirely. Things like Fortnite, for instance, by Epic Games, which is based around the similar idea of kind of survival and construction, but is an entirely different game. It's difficult to form a specific opinion on Warzy, because if you take them at their word, they were planning this and creating it before DayZ even came onto the scene, and they're getting ready to release it this year. They're looking to put out a beta later on, at which point people will figure out whether or not the bloody thing is actually any good. but there is absolutely no way that a game developer should have a monopoly on the idea of a game mechanic. I mean, come on, with DayZ, it's barely even a case of game mechanics. What does DayZ do that is different to other games? The answer is actually not a lot. It's the way that it takes these various ideas and puts them together that makes the interesting title. Game mechanics can be considered ingredients, and if you mix those ingredients together in the right amount and bake it for the right amount of time, then you might get something delicious. Of course, if you put them in the wrong amounts and you bake it for the incorrect amount of time, then you get something horrible. We need iteration within the games industry. It's so vitally important that this is allowed to continue to happen. Because who knows, WarZ may be better than DayZ in every possible respect, or it might not. It might absolutely suck and validate the fact that DayZ is a better game. But what comes after that? Maybe there's a cool mechanic within the WarZ, even though it ends up being a terrible game, that is taken by DayZ and used to evolve that title, or maybe it's taken by an entirely different game. Who knows? This entire industry is built upon stealing other people's ideas. And you know what? It's better for it. Ideas created in a vacuum are more often than not pretty damn awful. How many times have you heard a studio say, this is going to be revolutionary, we've come up with something entirely new, and then the game comes out and it's absolutely diabolical. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Build upon it. Build upon that solid foundation. Iterate. Create something better. Why build from scratch if there's something that already works? Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. As of now, until Sunday, I am doing MLG in Raleigh. I'm having to go up there a couple of days early because we're flying Crank over from Korea. That's the player we're actually sponsoring for this event, so gotta get some stuff organized over there. I will be broadcasting over on MajorLeagueGaming.com. You'll be able to watch me there if you so desire. If you happen to be coming to the event, then please do come down and say hi. Once again, I am very, very sorry for the lack of content that's coming out over the next few days. I did intend to get some done, but I had absolutely no luck whatsoever making that happen. And as soon as I get back from MLG, it'll be a couple of days before I fly out to PAX, so yeah, we're gonna have another rough couple of weeks on the channel. I'm really sorry, guys. I just hope I can bring you back some really good stuff from PAX to make up for it. I'll see you next time.